Get ready for a fascinating journey through time and mystery, diving into the story of one of the Bible's most iconic figures, Moses. Today we'll explore a thought-provoking and deeply spiritual question. Why did Satan desire Moses' body so much after his death? Moses, the man chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, lived a life marked by miracles, challenges, and unshakable faith. His story is one of the most profound and impactful in the scriptures, from his miraculous birth to his relentless leadership. However, Moses' story does not end with his death. There's a final chapter often overlooked, but filled with mystery and spiritual significance. The Bible reveals that after Moses died, there was a heavenly struggle over his body. Satan, the arch-enemy of God and mankind, contested with the archangel Michael over the prophet's body. But why? What was Satan's interest in Moses' remains? What does this event reveal about the battle between good and evil? Today, we will delve deeply into this story, uncovering the mysteries and interpreting the biblical passages that help us understand this cosmic dispute. We'll start from the beginning, exploring Moses' remarkable life and accomplishments, and then journey together to that pivotal moment of his death. Prepare yourselves to discover one of the most intriguing and mysterious stories of the Bible, inviting us to reflect on the nature of faith, spiritual warfare, and the legacy of one of the greatest leaders in sacred history. Stay with us as we unravel these sacred stories. But first, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep seeing fascinating stories like this. Now, let's turn our attention back to Moses' early years, a time marked by divine providence and miraculous events. Moses was born during a difficult period for the Hebrews in Egypt. The Israelites, enslaved and oppressed, were growing in number, alarming the Pharaoh. Fearing an uprising, he ordered all newborn Hebrew boys to be thrown into the Nile. However, Moses' mother, Jochebed, could not accept this fate for her son. In a courageous act of faith, she hid the baby for 3 months and, when she could no longer conceal him, prepared a basket of reeds, waterproofed it with tar and pitch, and set her son afloat in the river, trusting that God would protect him. The basket drifted until it came to rest near the spot where Pharaoh's daughter bathed. When the princess discovered the baby, her heart was moved. She decided to raise him as her own, naming him Moses, which means drawn out of the water. By divine providence, Moses was raised in the royal palace of Egypt, receiving education and privileges he would never have known as a slave. However, even though Moses was treated like a prince, he never forgot his Hebrew roots. One day, while visiting his brethren, he saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite. Filled with anger, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. The act, however, did not go unnoticed, and when Pharaoh learned of it, Moses had to flee to save his life. He took refuge in the land of Midian, where he began a new life. In Midian, Moses married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a priest of the region, and started a new chapter as a shepherd. It was here, far from Egypt's grandeur, that God called him for a great mission. One day, while tending the flock, Moses saw a burning bush that was not consumed by the flames. As he approached, he heard the voice of God calling him by name and revealing his mission, to return to Egypt and free the Israelites from slavery. Thus began Moses' great journey, which would take him back to Egypt, where he would confront Pharaoh's power and perform the miracles that God would work through him. From this point on, Moses was no longer just a man, but God's chosen leader and the liberator of the Hebrew people. With renewed courage and a divine mission, Moses prepared himself to face the greatest challenge of his life. Moses, armed with faith and the power of God, returned to Egypt, determined to fulfill his mission. Upon his arrival, he and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh, delivering God's message, "Let my people go, so they may hold a festival to me in the desert." Exodus 5. The Pharaoh, arrogant and unbelieving, refused to release the Israelites and increased their oppression even further. It was then that God began to show his power through Moses, bringing a series of 10 devastating plagues upon Egypt. The first plague turned the waters of the Nile into blood, killing the fish and making the water undrinkable. Pharaoh remained unmoved. Next came frogs that swarmed the land, followed by gnats that covered people and animals. Despite this, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Each new plague demonstrated God's power and wrath against Pharaoh's stubbornness. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies. The fifth, a deadly disease that wiped out Egyptian livestock. Then came painful boils on people and animals, followed by a storm of hail and fire that destroyed crops and everything exposed. After this, a swarm of locusts devoured what was left of the harvest, and then thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. Despite the chaos and destruction, Pharaoh still resisted. Then God announced the 10th and final plague, the most severe of all, the death of Egypt's firstborn. Moses instructed the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and mark their doorposts with its blood so that the angel of death would pass over their homes. That night, a great cry arose throughout Egypt as every firstborn, from Pharaoh's son to the lowliest prisoner, was struck down. Finally, Pharaoh relented. He summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and ordered them to leave Egypt immediately. The Israelites, after centuries of slavery, departed in great numbers, taking with them the spoils of the Egyptians. Moses led his people toward freedom, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. But Pharaoh, regretting his decision, gathered his army and pursued the Israelites to the Red Sea. There, once again, God displayed his power. Moses stretched out his staff over the sea, and the waters parted, creating a dry path for the Israelites to cross. When the Egyptians attempted to follow, the waters returned, swallowing Pharaoh's army and securing the Israelites' deliverance. This great miracle at the Red Sea solidified the people's faith in Moses as God's chosen leader. He guided them through the desert, where they would face new challenges and trials, but always with God's presence beside them. The Israelites, finally free from Egyptian oppression, began their long journey through the wilderness toward the Promised Land. However, this journey would be marked by numerous challenges and times of testing. Shortly after crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites faced a shortage of water. At Marah, the only available water was bitter, but God instructed Moses to throw a piece of wood into the water, making it sweet and drinkable. Continuing their journey, they reached Elim, where they found 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, a true oasis in the desert. In the wilderness of sin, the people began to complain about the lack of food. In his infinite mercy, God provided manna from heaven, a substance like white flakes that appeared each morning. The manna sustained the Israelites throughout their 40 years in the desert. Additionally, in response to their grumbling, God sent quail for them to have meat. Another critical moment came at Rephidim, where there was no water again. The desperate people quarreled with Moses and even tested God's patience. Moses, following God's instructions, struck the rock at Horeb, and water flowed out to quench the thirst of the crowd. The journey was also marked by conflicts. The Amalekites attacked the Israelites at Rephidim, and Moses, with the help of Joshua and Aaron, led the defense. As long as Moses held up his hands in prayer, the Israelites prevailed. With the support of Aaron and Hur, who held up his arms, victory was achieved. At Mount Sinai, God made a covenant with the Israelites, giving them the tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments. The mountain smoked, and thunder and lightning accompanied the divine presence, a spectacle that deeply impressed the people. Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain, receiving not only the commandments, but also detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, the place where God would dwell among his people. During Moses' absence, the people grew impatient and persuaded Aaron to make a golden calf, symbolizing the deity they believed had delivered them from Egypt. Upon descending the mountain and seeing the idolatry, Moses, in a fit of anger, broke the tablets of the law. However, he interceded for the people, and God, in his mercy, forgave them and commanded the making of new tablets. Throughout the 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites faced many trials and challenges. Grumbling and rebellion were constant. Moses, as a leader, often interceded with God on behalf of the people, demonstrating unshakable patience and faith. God provided miraculously, as when he sent fiery serpents to discipline the people, and later instructed Moses to lift up a bronze serpent that would heal those who looked at it. Moses led his people with steadfastness and devotion, preparing them for their entry into the Promised Land. Although he himself would not enter due to his act of disobedience, when he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, his role as leader and prophet would leave a lasting legacy. In the final years of his life, Moses continued to lead the people with determination and faithfulness, even knowing he would not enter the Promised Land. God had told him that because of his disobedience, when he struck the rock at Meribah, he would see the land, but he would not set foot on it. Before his death, Moses delivered a series of speeches to the people of Israel, reminding them of God's laws and decrees. These words are recorded in the book of Deuteronomy. He reaffirmed God's covenant with Israel, urged the people to remain obedient, and reiterated the blessings of faithfulness and the curses of disobedience. Aware that his mission was nearing its end, Moses prepared his successor, Joshua, to lead the people in the conquest of Canaan. God then called Moses to Mount Nebo, where he would be able to see the Promised Land. From the summit of Pisgah, Moses gazed upon the entire expanse of the land that God had promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was a bittersweet moment as he witnessed the fulfillment of the divine promise, but knew that his role had come to an end. In the plains of Moab, opposite Jericho, Moses climbed Mount Nebo as God had instructed. There God showed him all the land, from Gilead as far as Dan, Naphtali, Ephraim, and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev, and the region of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Moses saw all this, and God said, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Deuteronomy 34. And there, on the top of Mount Nebo, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died. God himself buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, but to this day no one knows the exact location of his grave. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor had his strength diminished. The Israelites mourned for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days until the period of mourning was over. With the death of Moses, an era came to a close. But his influence and leadership would endure for generations. Moses had been the mediator of the covenant, the lawgiver, the prophet, and the leader who guided the Israelites from slavery to the brink of freedom. He left a legacy of faith and obedience to God that would continue to shape the identity of the people of Israel. The mystery of his burial and the reason God hid his body remain subjects of reflection and intrigue. With Moses' death on Mount Nebo, one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible arises: the concealment of his body. In a unique act, God took upon himself the responsibility of burying Moses, hiding the burial place from everyone. Deuteronomy 34 tells us, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab as the Lord had said. He buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is." This deliberate concealment by God has raised many questions and theories over the centuries. Why did God hide Moses' body? What was the purpose of such secrecy? The answer can be found in the nature of Moses' ministry and the worship practices of the Israelites. Moses was an extraordinary leader, and the people held him in great reverence. There was a real danger that the Israelites prone to idolatry, might turn Moses' tomb into a site of veneration and worship, diverting their focus from worshiping God. The concealment of his body prevented this, preserving the purity of worship directed solely toward God. But the mystery deepens when we read in Jude chapter 1 about a heavenly dispute. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not dare to bring a slanderous accusation against him, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." This heavenly struggle over Moses' body between the archangel Michael and Satan invites us to deeply reflect on the nature of spiritual battles that happen beyond our sight. Satan's interest in Moses' body reveals much about his motives and strategies. Satan, the accuser, constantly seeks ways to corrupt and undermine God's plans. He knew Moses was a central figure in Israel's story of redemption and aimed to use his body to divert the people from true worship of God. But why specifically Moses' body? One theory suggests that Satan wanted to discredit Moses after his death. We know that Moses himself did not enter the Promised Land due to an act of disobedience. Satan, known for exploiting our failures against us, might have sought to use this moment of weakness to undermine the Israelites' trust in their leader and, by extension, in God's faithfulness. By corrupting Moses' body, Satan could have tried to create a narrative of defeat and hopelessness. Another possibility is that Satan intended to turn Moses' body into an idol. The Israelites, often inclined toward idolatry, could have easily begun to worship Moses' tomb, turning away from the true worship of the living God. Satan knows that idolatry is one of the most effective ways to lead God's people astray. Making Moses an object of worship could have been a tactic to distort the Israelites' faith and devotion. The role of the archangel Michael in this dispute is crucial. Michael, the protector of God's people, understood that Moses' integrity and legacy needed to be preserved. He did not engage in direct confrontation with Satan on human terms, but simply stated, "The Lord rebuke you." This response reminds us that ultimate authority belongs to God, and that in moments of spiritual conflict, we must rely on divine power and justice. This passage shows us that even after death, a person's influence and legacy can remain a battleground in the spiritual realm. Moses was not just an earthly leader. He was a symbol of God's covenant with his people. Protecting his body was about protecting that covenant and ensuring that the people of Israel would continue to look to God and not to a human idol. As we reflect on the celestial battle for Moses' body and its implications, we clearly see the greatness of God's plan and the significance of Moses' legacy. Even after his death, Moses continued to be a central figure in the story of redemption, and his influence extended far beyond his earthly life. Moses' impact is evident not only in the history of Israel, but throughout the entire biblical narrative. He is frequently mentioned in various parts of Scripture as an example of faith and obedience. In the New Testament, Moses appears during the transfiguration of Jesus, alongside Elijah, speaking with Jesus about his imminent death. Luke 9. This shows that Moses still held a significant role in God's plan, even after his death. The spiritual battle over Moses' body serves as a powerful reminder that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 6. This event challenges us to recognize the gravity of spiritual warfare and the need to stand firm in faith, trusting God for our protection and defense. Moses' legacy also teaches us about leadership and faithfulness. He shows us that even the greatest leaders are human and make mistakes, but God, in His grace, can use these leaders to fulfill His purposes. Moses did not enter the Promised Land, but he prepared his people for that conquest, laying the foundation of faith and obedience that would guide Israel for generations. The hiding of Moses' body and the struggle between Michael and Satan also remind us of God's holiness and sovereignty. By concealing Moses' body, God preserved the purity of worship directed toward him, preventing idolatry and ensuring that his people remained focused on true worship. This divine act reinforces the idea that God is zealous for his glory and cares for his servants until the end. Finally, the story of Moses and the battle for his body invite us to reflect on our own lives and legacies. How are we living our faith? Are we prepared for the spiritual battles around us? Are we leaving a legacy of obedience and faithfulness to God? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so that more people can discover these sacred stories.